Welcome, everyone. Welcome to today's program about James McDonald. And as you can see, I'm not Olivia Mattis, your favorite host. I'm Laura Seltzer-Dunai, and I am the educational committee. I'm on the educational committee for the Susan Mendez Foundation, and I'm also a documentary filmmaker who produced a film about Holocaust refugees who obtain life-saving visas from Aristides de Souza Mendez. And also James G. McDonald was instrumental in helping save those refugees on that ship come to the US. So I'm very excited about this program, and I'm thrilled to have this esteemed group of people, these guests today. And I would like to start off with telling you a little bit about the Susan Mendez Foundation. We're dedicated to honoring the memory of Holocaust rescuer Aristides de Souza Mendez, and to educate the world about his good work, his important work. And what I love about this series is that it features many heroes, just like Susan Mendez, whose courageous actions made the world a better place because they chose to help. And a perfect example of this is James G. McDonald, a US diplomat who served as the very first United States ambassador to Israel. And now, without further ado, let's introduce our three guests. Shuli Eshel is an award-winning producer and director of numerous documentaries dealing with the arts, politics, social and historical matters. Today, we're going to be talking about a topic she addresses in her engaging and informative documentary, A Voice Among the Silent, The Legacy of James G. McDonald, which you all have access to watch through Monday, and I highly recommend it. Our next guest, I'm pleased to announce, is Dr. RAFAEL Medov, who is the founding director of the David S. Wyman Institute for Holocaust Studies and the author of more than 20 books about the Holocaust, Zionism, and American Jewish history. Dr. Medov has taught Jewish history at Ohio State, Purchase College, and the State University of New York, and he's currently teaching at Yeshiva University. His latest book is, and you guys can check this out, America and the Holocaust, a documentary history. Last but not least, we have Vail Barrett, and he is the grandson of James G. McDonald. Vail graduated from Westminster College in 1973. He was an art major and later worked at the Metropolitan Museum of Art and studied studio art in New York City. His pastel landscapes were shown at the Christina Gallery on Martha's Vineyard for 14 years, in case you guys are going to be out at Martha's Vineyard or have been there. His work is also, he also works in corporate collections, and his cartoon illustrations and his sister's writings were actually used in the 2018 book, Three Sheets to the Wind. Vail is passionate about his grandfather's legacy and gives lectures at libraries, churches, and Jewish community centers. So without further ado, I would like to give you the floor, RAFAEL.
Thanks, Laura. And I want to add my thanks to Dr. Olivia Mattis and her staff, Matthew Spurn, and the rest of the staff for all their assistance in making today's program possible. To me, the most remarkable quality of James McDonald was his perseverance. It's so easy to become discouraged in the face of obstacles, and all the more so for somebody who took on the very frustrating and unenviable task of trying to help Jewish refugees fleeing from Nazi Germany in the 1930s. Again and again, as you saw in Shuli Eshel's film, McDonald encountered obstacles and obstruction, and yet somehow he found within himself the fortitude to persist. In 1933, McDonald began the task of going from country to country, searching as a high commissioner for the League of Nations for a refuge for the Jews fleeing Hitler. After some 2 years of encountering no, no, and no, finally, as we know, Ambassador McDonald resigned in protest. But before I share with you an interesting political cartoon about McDonald and his resignation, I want to comment on one of the aspects of this sense of disappointment and frustration that McDonald repeatedly encountered. And I'm referring here to McDonald's attempts to persuade President Franklin Roosevelt to make a very modest US government financial contribution to McDonald's work. As the film notes, McDonald's efforts on behalf of the League of Nations had to be privately financed, and so he was stuck doing a certain amount of fundraising. McDonald felt that if the United States, the Roosevelt administration, would make even a token contribution, it would open the door and inspire other countries around the world to follow suit. He approached President Roosevelt with a request for just $10,000, and FDR said yes. But then, month after month, McDonald followed up, kept sending letters and making calls to the White House, but the funds, even that small token fund amount, never came through. McDonald's resignation as League of Nations High Commissioner set off an international controversy because he released his resignation letter in protest, and in fact, it was published in full in the New York Times and elsewhere. In the course of my separate research on political cartoons in the 1930s, I came across this interesting one from a Hebrew language newspaper in Palestine in 1936. You can see McDonald, you see how the artist depicted his sort of distinctive hairstyle. And here we have the figure of the League of Nations or the international community being represented by this sleeping figure on the chair, McDonald throwing at him the piece of paper which is labeled resignation. And the caption describes McDonald's hope that his resignation would arouse the international community. Sadly, as we know, it did not wake up the international community. But nonetheless, McDonald did not give up all hope. 3 years later, he once again had the experience of being led to believe by President Roosevelt that the United States would do something. In early 1938, McDonald was chosen as chairman of a newly created body called the President's Advisory Committee on Political Refugees. Ostensibly, this would be an advisory council that would present President Roosevelt with suggestions and plans, concrete ideas for helping Jewish refugees. McDonald eagerly took on the task, but as he discovered in the months and years to follow, it was never meant to be more than an empty shell. Again and again, McDonald and his colleagues on the committee presented President Roosevelt with ideas for places where Jews might be settled and other kinds of avenues for assisting the refugees. And yet Roosevelt almost never took its advice seriously. Once again, we can only imagine the terrible sense of disappointment and frustration that McDonald must have experienced to have the President of the United States again lead him to believe that the administration was going to do something, but then have that hope shattered. McDonald was a very patient man. He was also a very strong supporter of President Roosevelt. And so he was not eager to publicly dissent from the president's refugee policies. But I found in my research that as the 1940s wore on, and as the verification of the mass murder of the Jews began to reach the West, McDonald increasingly spoke out publicly in lectures and in articles that he wrote, taking issue with President Roosevelt's policies. In 1944, McDonald made his boldest public challenge to President Roosevelt. The occasion was a Jewish convention in Buffalo, New York. And here in this local newspaper report, we see excerpts from McDonald's speech. I draw your attention to the middle of the second paragraph, where McDonald speaks about how if only the Western powers had been willing to confront Hitler early on, that perhaps there never would have been a war at all. And going further into the next paragraph, we see that McDonald deplored what he called the short-sightedness occasioned by timidity and fear of not being reelected. Note the date. This was May 1944. It was a presidential election year. FDR was the Allied leader who was facing reelection. This was a very thinly disguised reference challenge to President Roosevelt to say that he was being too timid politically and was so worried about not being reelected that that was holding him back from helping Jewish refugees in any concrete way. Whether or not President Roosevelt's reelection would have been actually impacted by helping Jewish refugees is, of course, highly doubtful. A poll taken, in fact, by the White House, but never publicized, just a few weeks before McDonald's speech, found that 70% of the American public was in favor of allowing Jewish refugees in an unlimited number to come to the United States for the duration of the war. So McDonald really was the one who was on the side of what most Americans thought about lending a humanitarian hand to help Jewish refugees. Nonetheless, McDonald had become convinced that the president whom he so admired, even adored, in fact, had once again let him down, but more than that, had let humanity down in this important respect. This political element of the McDonald story, his willingness to challenge President Roosevelt, may partly explain the strange fact that when the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum created a special Americans and the Holocaust exhibit a few years ago, it omitted James McDonald from the 5,000 square foot exhibit. There was not a single reference to McDonald in that exhibit. And the recent Ken Burns film, The U.S. and the Holocaust, which was based on that exhibit, likewise inexplicably omitted any mention of James McDonald. That's remarkable considering, as Shuli Eshel's film showed you, McDonald played a major role in helping to bring about the rescue of several thousand Jews during the Holocaust. Shouldn't he have merited even a brief mention in that exhibit or that important film? Happily, McDonald has begun, very belatedly, to receive some public recognition. Here you see a photograph from an event that was held last fall in Jerusalem, where a promenade was named in honor of McDonald on the street adjoining the United States Embassy in Jerusalem. Here you see the mayor of Jerusalem and a senior official of the United States Embassy holding the plaque that now is situated on that site. And also you see here our distinguished friend and colleague Shuli Eshel speaking at that same important ceremony. And with that, it is my pleasure now to invite you to hear from the filmmaker, Shuli Eshel.
Thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here today. Thank you. And I will start telling you how I feel about making the film about James G. McDonald. Thank you, Laura Zeltzer, for running this event. And thank you, Olivia Mattis, for creating the important event. And thank you, Matthew Spurn, for helping me prepare my remarks. I would like to share with you how I got to make the film about James G. McDonald. Lived from 1886 until 1964, and what followed. I received an invitation from Temple Shalom in Chicago, featuring Golda Meir, James G. McDonald, and his daughter, Barbara McDonald Stewart. Now, I'd like to show you the slide of what happened. This is a slide that really intrigued me, and I had never heard of James G. McDonald and his daughter. Given that I'm an Israeli-born citizen and have never heard of them, I went to Temple Shalom to find out for myself. Luckily, I sat and befriended Heidi and her parents, waving 2 books about McDonald. I found out from Stephen Mize, who came from the US Holocaust Museum in Washington, DC, that nobody had made a film about McDonald. So Heidi said, I can put you in touch with McDonald's granddaughter, Cynthia Barrett, in New York. After a few months, Cynthia asked that I mail her 2 of my films. After a year of waiting, I called Heidi and told her that Cynthia was not responding. And her reaction was, I would not badger her. Well, me being Shuli, I decided to email Cynthia 1 more time. Within an hour, I received an email to contact McDonald's daughter, Barbara McDonald Stewart. And this was her response. Read 3 of my father's books, Advocate for the Doomed, 1932 to 1935, Refugees and Rescue, 1935 to 1945, and My Mission in Israel, 1948 to 1951, and then contact me. When I called Barbara after a month, I told her that what disturbed me most was that Franklin D. Roosevelt never mentioned the Jews publicly and never made an effort to save the Jews of Europe. At that point, Barbara and I began the work of creating the film. Because of conflicting reports of what was happening in Germany, McDonald traveled to Germany in early 1933 to see for himself. McDonald was able to get a private meeting with Hitler through his acquaintance with Hitler's foreign press secretary. And McDonald was courageous enough to raise the Jewish question with Hitler. Hitler basically tells him, I will do the thing that the rest of the world would like to do. He doesn't know how to get rid of the Jews. I will show them. And he makes a physical reference that he will wring their necks. Within 3 weeks after meeting with Hitler, McDonald met with President Roosevelt on May 1, 1933, and warned him of Hitler's coming war against the Jews. His daughter, Barbara, said, my father not only talking to various Nazis really came away from his 4 weeks visit with a feeling that there was no future for Jews in Germany. The position of High Commission for German Refugees at the League gave McDonald an important platform to deliver his warnings and carry out his efforts to relocate Jews from Germany. His daughter, Janet McDonald Barrett, said, his willingness to speak out very early against Hitler and his methods was to me the most important thing he ever did. McDonald resigned as High Commissioner for German Refugees at the end of 1935. His resignation letter was front page in the New York Times on December 30th. Barbara McDonald Stewart, and only by resigning and making a dramatic statement would anybody pay attention. McDonald was invited to the White House in April 1938 as part of a group of people who were there to lend support to the White House Refugee Initiative. And he set up a permanent advisory committee, and they quickly selected McDonald as chairman because he had the most experience. Kristallnacht in Nazi Germany, the night of the broken glass. What Hitler had told McDonald in 1933 was truly beginning to happen. McDonald convened a meeting of the full advisory committee that called for American action to assist Jewish refugees. However, all Roosevelt did was recall his ambassador in Berlin to come back to Washington for consultation. Hitler invades Poland. World War II begins in Europe. Breckinridge Long became McDonald's nemesis. President Roosevelt did nothing to get the policy changed. McDonald's Advisory Committee administered an emergency visa program used by Varian Fry, an American journalist that got 2,000 Jewish refugees out of France into the United States. By the beginning of 1943 and through 1944, McDonald began to challenge Roosevelt publicly. Roosevelt died in April 1945, less than a month before Germany surrendered. He left no memoirs. President Truman appointed McDonald the first US ambassador to Israel. James G. McDonald explained that, to me, the threat of Jewish extermination in Germany was a threat also to all Christians, indeed, to all freedom of religion and all democratic ideals and principles. The threat to Jews was not only a hideous wrong, but also created a world problem overwhelming significance. Hence, it was not only for the sake of the Jews, but for the larger cause of freedom, justice, and equal treatment of all human beings everywhere, whatever their race, religion, or nationality, that I, a blonde Aryan, offering of Scotch, Canadian, and Midwest American stock, a teacher and student by profession and inclination, became champion for Jewish aspiration and equal rights. It was an irresistible call. I was moved to do research and make a film, A Voice Among the Silent, about McDonald's heroic efforts to alert the American leadership and the world about Hitler's plans, with the aid of his daughter, Barbara McDonald Stewart, to make sure he was not forgotten. I wish that Ken Burns had also contributed to ensuring the memory of his important role during that tragic period. My two wishes are that all of you will email the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. and ask them to show the film or the film. Alternately, you may purchase the James G. McDonald through me, www.avoiceamongthesilent.com. I ask because Ken Burns chose not to include the role of James McDonald. It's possible that they did not like how we presented FDR. Please write or call PBS to air the film. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you. And now we're going to Vail Barrett is going to take over, and he is the grandson of James G. McDonald. Thank you.
Thank you, Shuli. That was a beautiful presentation from both of you. It's really remarkable to hear more details about my grandfather from the experts, frankly. I know the family stories. So thank you so much. My name is Vail Barrett, and I am the grandson of James G. McDonald, as was mentioned, who was the first United States ambassador to Israel. He died in 1964 when I was 14 years old. I knew him as a tall, very intelligent, soft-spoken man. As I grew up, I learned more about him from my mother, Janet, and her sister, Barbara. They were McDonald's only two children. James G. McDonald was born in Coldwater, Ohio, And here is the picture of me, lower left, and my brother in the middle, who's named Donald after McDonald in 1959. This is Barbara McDonald Stewart's wedding day. McDonald attended Indiana University, and here he is with my grandmother, Ruth Stafford, eventually McDonald, and they were married. And what was interesting is he was a Catholic, she was a Methodist, and they had 2 ceremonies to make everything religiously legal. My grandmother went to DePaul University and later became a high school principal. My mother, Janet McDonald, was born in Bloomington, Indiana. Eventually, the McDonalds moved to New York City with their young daughter. My mother's sister was born 9 years later. Once in New York, McDonald joined the Foreign Policy Association, which was founded in 1917. There he met guest speakers such as Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt. And here he is with Eleanor Roosevelt, who he had a lifetime friendship with. And she did confide in him more than Franklin did. He spent several nights and had dinners at the White House with them. There have been other guest speakers, and this is where he got his foundation. This is a photo of James G. McDonald and Felix Warburg. McDonald knew the Our Crowd of New York City, the Jewish financial elites. So here is Warburg, and he also knew Otto Kahn. Here McDonald is getting an award connected with the JDC, the Joint Distribution Committee. I will mention more about them in a moment. In 1933, President Roosevelt sent McDonald to Europe as an envoy to meet the new chancellor in Germany, Adolf Hitler. McDonald was the second to interview Adolf Hitler. American journalist Dorothy Thompson was first. She may have had more fame then because she was married to Sinclair Lewis, and also her reporting was better known around the world. McDonald is here with Dorothy Thompson, and you can imagine they had plenty to talk about since both of them had their exclusive interviews with Hitler. In 1936, McDonald, around 35, 36, as Shuli said, resigned from his European post and wrote a resignation paper directed to the League of Nations, warning the world of what was happening in Germany and about the refugee expulsion and death threats to all Jews and others who didn't fit in with Hitler's Nazi plans. This, in some ways, is what he's most famous for speaking out early and in the most powerful way he knew to get attention from Roosevelt and the world and other world leaders. Years later, as I mentioned, became famous for that. In 1938, something interesting happened. Again, it's close to 39 when war broke out, but in 1938, McDonald attended the Avion Conference in Lake Geneva. He worked there with someone that I've just met the grandson of. His name is Mr. David Heinemann, and I recently told him that, we compared notes where Joseph Hyman, his grandfather, and my grandfather both attended the Avion Conference. And I just would like to read this as far as the connection we had. In 1938, the Avion Conference and also with Palestine. From Joseph Hyman's activities within the JDC, he served as advisor to the League of Nations High Commissioner on Refugees, James G. McDonald, and also was assistant to Felix Warburg. This is Joseph Hyman, and he was also chairman of the Jewish Agency for Palestine. These men, through the JDC, American influence and financial resources, tried to stabilize the refugee crisis unfolding across Europe. I'm honored to have them recognized today for their humanitarian work. And here is a picture of McDonald and Mr. Hyman together for the first time since 1938. After World War II, McDonald, toured Europe and visited the DP camps, or displaced person camps. He learned from Holocaust survivors and refugees that they did not want to go back to their destroyed homes or their lost families. They wanted to go to Palestine. So when he was driven around a rather destroyed Germany, he ended up seeing part of the, I've just forgotten their name, Nuremberg trials, which is really quite remarkable. In 1948, Truman appointed him ambassador to Israel, and he took my Aunt Barbara, who was just out of college at age 23 at the time, to become his social secretary and embassy host. Here is a picture of James G. McDonald with Chaim Weizmann and Ben-Gurion together. Remarkable that he knew them in the 20s and early 30s, and when he was in Israel, he was welcomed by them because they had known him earlier. McDonald was told by Truman's advisory committee that he really was the first and almost only choice to be ambassador to Israel. And here is a somewhat staged picture of my grandfather with a map of Israel and Ben-Gurion in conference drinking orange juice, frankly. Apparently Ben-Gurion thought there were too many glasses on the table, but it's all orange juice. And as ambassador, he invited conductor Leonard Bernstein to the embassy at least 4 times. Here is Leonard Bernstein with my grandfather during intermission of one of his concerts. He was so popular that the audience, who were probably refugees and Holocaust survivors, literally thought the classical music was the return of civilization. Also, both men stayed during an intermission when there was an air raid and came back on stage and played, and the audience was thrilled with that kind of event. So there is a picture of the rooftop of the embassy where they had several parties and gatherings. It was cooler at night on the roof at the embassy. And another visitor to the embassy, here it is, the embassy, my grandfather in the middle, my Aunt Barbara on the left. And another visitor to the embassy was Ruth Gruber, who, and here she is, having lunch with my grandfather around 1948. She was a journalist photographer under the Roosevelt administration. One of her first assignments was photographing Alaska, but she eventually found herself in Haifa Harbor taking pictures of the Exodus ship coming into port. She was the only woman or any journalist to allow it on board to take pictures of the refugees. And I met her in person at the 92nd Street Y. She lived to 105. The United States Holocaust Memorial Museum has McDonald's portrait and his 4 volumes of his diaries. When James G. McDonald left his ambassador post in 1951, President Truman wrote him a letter of congratulations and said he had accomplished at least part of his mission. He gave him 2 assignments originally. One was to give the best of American policy and advice to the Israeli government, and second was to bring the neighbors of Israel closer together. The first one he succeeded at. Sadly, 70 plus years later, peace in the Middle East is still very elusive. Toward the end of his life, McDonald continued to raise money for Israel through Israeli bonds. For his efforts to save refugees, he is regarded as one of the righteous in Israel. And as just mentioned earlier, there was a small park which Shuli spoke at, and a street also named after him. And for me, a family legacy like this is remarkable, and I'm forever indebted to all of you for speaking about my grandfather today. So that will be the conclusion of my formal remarks.
Well, thank you all so very much. I mean, so fascinating, and I'm looking forward to the Q&A in a couple of minutes. I'm going to make a couple announcements first, but I'm collecting a few questions. Please feel free to continue to populate them and specify if you want me to ask a specific question to a specific person. I want to let you guys know that we have a very interesting upcoming program. The great French mime Marcel Marceau was the son of a kosher butcher who was interned and murdered in Auschwitz. Following his father's deportation, Marcel joined the French resistance, assisting his cousin in escorting Jewish children from Nazi-occupied France to neutral Switzerland. So he used his artistry and his charisma to engage with the children and keep them quiet during their long and perilous trek to freedom. Later, he gave his first major performance up to 3,000 US troops after the liberation of Paris in August 44. So that is what our upcoming program is about. I also want to say that I'm personally so touched by this program and learning about James McDonald, learning more about him. I knew of him prior to today, but he's one of the people who was instrumental in helping a group of refugees that came to my hometown port. And you'll see that in the film, the steamship Kwanzaa. And, you know, I, as some of you might know, I produced a documentary about that ship called Nobody Wants Us, a PBS film. So thank you, Shuli, for highlighting it in your film. And he's just such an important person that we all need to know about. Yet another unsung hero in the world. I'd like to just start with some questions. Okay, here we go. Someone asked earlier, I'm not sure who to address this. I'll see who would like to answer this question. Was he honored as righteous among the nations?
So the category of righteous among the nations at Yad Vashem is reserved for individuals who directly risked their lives in rescuing Jews from the Holocaust. So McDonald would not fit into that category. So he's not technically among that group.
Thank you very much. Okay. And did McDonald ever consult with William Dodd, another Roosevelt appointee who was described in the book by Eric Larson in The Garden of the Beasts? Anybody know that answer?
Well, they certainly knew each other, and they came from the same world of foreign policy scholars, men who were particularly up to date on events happening in Germany. Dodd is not mentioned in the diaries as an ongoing source of influence or contact with McDonald, but they were in touch to a certain extent because Dodd was the first U.S. ambassador to Germany appointed by President Roosevelt, a position, by the way, for which McDonald himself was briefly considered before Dodd was chosen, and then McDonald was chosen for the League of Nations position.
Could I add to that a little?
Yes.
You're absolutely right. My aunt did say that my grandfather was interested in the ambassadorship to Germany, and he did not get it, but she did mention that to me. He thought of that. One of the entrees with Hofstangl, who got him in to meet Hitler, was McDonald's mother was Anna Dietrich, a German. So that was a little bit of an entree to getting into Hitler's interview.
Next question. Did James McDonald try to go through Eleanor Roosevelt to convince the president to do something?
I could mention that as I said earlier, she confided in him. What Roosevelt was a lot more cagey in his discussions. He was aware that what might be reported as a Jewish war or things that would be taking the country to war for isolated America, and think that might not be the reason after World War I to go back to war. But I think he spoke to him at different times, but it was never published and never really revealed even by Eleanor.
There are some interesting letters from McDonald to the First Lady, 1933, 1934. There's one in particular where he expresses some rather frank frustration that the US government, meaning her husband, the president, was not taking any interest in his work. In general, however, McDonald was very cautious in his contacts with both the president and the First Lady. As we've noted, he was a great admirer of President Roosevelt, and he did not seek to actively lobby the president or to try to get to the president through Eleanor. McDonald did the work to to which he was assigned at the League of Nations and then the President's Advisory Committee. But he was not an aggressive public advocate or lobbyist for the cause. He operated within the channels where he felt the most comfortable, and that included many private contacts with First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. But I've not found specific instances in which he tried to use the First Lady in a sense to influence the president.
Did McDonald speak German? I think someone said that they thought in the documentary his mother was German.
Yes, he did. Yes, his mother was German. Anna Dietrich. Yes.
Was McDonald able to access information from the Polish underground?
I don't know.
I've never come across any evidence of that. Keep in mind, when you speak of the Polish underground, you're referring to the World War II period. That was long after McDonald had returned to the United States, and he didn't have contacts with underground groups in Europe during that period. No.
Was it Mr. McDonald's religious upbringing or other influences that shaped his values? Do you guys?
Bill, what do you think about that?
Okay, I had heard of this, that a fairly strict Catholic upbringing. He had 4 brothers. His mother and father were pretty strict. A modest income in the early days. Yes, and then he was friends with religious leaders, Henry Emerson Fosdick at the Riverside Church in New York, and of course became friends with Rabbi Weiss in New York City as well. But yes, I think he was influenced and took to it. And then, as you've said very many times, took a moral high ground, which was extraordinary for a Catholic or anyone. He saw the big picture of all religions being affected, what was happening in Germany. I have a little sidebar as far as influencing a president. Later on, when Truman was president, my grandfather knew Eddie Jacobson, who was Truman's haberdasher business partner, and he also knew Weitzman. So the two people, one, Weitzman did go in to talk to Truman and was almost thrown out when he was discussing, I guess, possible future of the creation of Israel. And Eddie Jacobson, my grandfather, went to his daughter's wedding. So he knew these players that Truman was aware of. And whether he had any influence in knowing both of them, I'm not sure, but he may have spoken to him.
We'll do a few more questions. These are great. Keep them coming. I'm just copying and pasting and putting them all in here for you guys. Did Peter Bergson and James McDonald ever meet and discuss the issue of threats to Jews? Both people are still relatively unknown. Do you guys know?
In my research on the Bergson group, I never came across any contacts between them. Keep in mind that the Bergson activists and McDonald really operated in 2 very different worlds. The Bergson people were Jewish activists who were operating outside the mainstream and doing rather controversial things like placing full-page newspaper ads, challenging the Roosevelt administration. Whereas James McDonald was operating very much within the established order, the mainstream of American political culture and government circles. So it's not surprising to me that their paths did not intersect. It could have happened, but I've never found any documents suggesting that they met. No.
Okay, a couple more questions. We'll go probably till 2:10 Eastern Standard Time. Well, 2:50. Do the McDonald diaries shed any light on the role of prominent Jewish organizations to remain silent?
I wouldn't put it that way, but McDonald diaries are an enormous multi-volume collection which one cannot summarize briefly in a forum such as ours. There are a lot. McDonald had a lot of interesting interactions with Jewish leaders, especially during the 1930s. I would not say that there are many significant revelations based on my own research on American Jewish leaders' responses to the Holocaust, I did not find anything earth-shaking in McDonald's diaries with regard to that. But nonetheless, their interactions are interesting. And there are sometimes even amusing when we hear things that McDonald wrote in his diary about an impression, a negative impression that some Jewish leader made. But not what I would call significant political insights or revelations, no.
I could give a little insight to that. McDonald had a secretary with him wherever he went, and at night he would write down what he thought of the meeting or who he met and got it off his chest in essence and created a diary situation. He didn't always tell the other person he was talking to exactly what he felt. He was very, very astute and very observant to what they were trying to tell him, but he never engaged in any major arguments. But to put down the eyewitness and his feelings or analysis of the situation, as Mr. Medofff reports, it was very important. The eyewitness was crucial. I'm sorry more people didn't read it at the time, but he didn't know it might be published, frankly. Interesting. But I was told to be a little prepared. Here is one of the diaries, and here's how thick it is. This is just one volume.
Wow. Shuli, I'm getting so many comments for you about how inspired people are about the film and how they want to show this film to students. Can you share with us again the best way that people can utilize the film and access it to share it with community and communities as well, I think should be watching this film?
Right. Well, the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. did not show the film. And that is very, very, very disturbing to me because Barbara McDonald Stewart and I tried very, very hard to get it shown. And because I think it was because of FDR that they're so holding his position, that they never showed the film. And now we go to Ken Burns and he writes three trilogies about the Holocaust and doesn't mention McDonald even once. So I think that the people who are listening to this event should do something about it. They should call PBS and they should call the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. and ask that that film should be shown to everybody. And I don't know what we can do, but hopefully there are people in the audience that might have some ideas and make it happen.
Someone just asked if it is in the Holocaust archives, at least. They're not, are they storing it in the archives?
They might be on. They might have a copy because Barbara McDonald Stewart sent them the first copy we had about the Holocaust and everything, but they never showed it. So I don't really know. But if people would ask the Holocaust Museum or Ken Burns, they should try and get it either on the air on PBS or showed it at the Holocaust Museum.
Right.
Washington, D.C. So I think it should be done. And the people who are interested in making it happen, it would be absolutely fabulous. And McDonald deserves it, and his daughters too.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm seeing in these transcripts, these are great, everybody. I mean, people are saying, oh, it needs to be in the Toronto Holocaust Museum. It needs to be at my various schools. We'll have that transcript for you, Shuli, to share. And we will also have the transcript of this full film this will also be on YouTube. Someone just asked me if the film will be on YouTube.
No, I also have a www.avoiceamongthesilent.com where people are purchasing copies of the James G. McDonald, but I think it should be widely shown in the United States and in Israel and in Germany and everywhere else.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us, all three of you today. And just to correct what I said, this video of the dialogue will be on YouTube on the Susan Mendez Foundation site, that you'll be able to, or the Susan Mendez Foundation YouTube page that you can watch. Someone was asking about that. And we really look forward to seeing you all next week. And I want to open the floor for final comments from our distinguished guests.
I have some, if you'd like. I came prepared for this. I won't mention what Shuli did, which is wonderful at the end of her movie, but I have something else to add to that. I just, again, for me and my family, I want to thank our audience and their desire to know more about James G. McDonald and his place in history. I also want to thank the Susan Mendez Foundation and everybody who helped put this program together. My whole family appreciates your efforts. As a final thought, I think the words from a letter that McDonald received from his friend Rabbi Weiss's daughter, Justine. I'd like to read that. He received it in 1961, so he was able to read it. It sort of speaks to his character. Dear Mr. McDonald, to many people everywhere, you represent not only all that is the great tradition of America in its truest meaning, you personify the American who is great because everything he has uttered and done, indeed all that he is, flows inevitably from the inner commitments to those ideals of human justice and the aspirations for a nobler way of life for all people. I send these words in tribute and affection to you as a friend of my father and a man who I know and love. And I find that speaks to his character, to his life, and I'm delighted to share that with you.
Great.
Julie, a final thought?
Well, I still think that at this point, more people should try to get to show the film of James G. McDonald, whether it is a college or the U.S. Holocaust Museum or what we did in Jerusalem recently to honor James G. McDonald. I think that Yad Vashem in Israel, I think more should be shown and more should be talked about what James G. McDonald did, because it's very important to remember that and honor that.
Thank you. My final thought, you know, we live in a very overheated political culture these days where it seems like everything is based on what political agenda it advances or slows down. Everything seems so politicized. Part of the greatness of James McDonald was his ability to rise above his own personal political preferences, his strong, understandable support for President Roosevelt, his willingness to challenge Roosevelt's policies and to not allow McDonald's personal political leanings to color his attitude toward Jewish refugees. It would be a tragedy if this contemporary attitude of politicization were to continue to keep the memory and legacy of James McDonald out of the public spotlight. His legacy deserves to be heard, and especially young people today need to hear about McDonald because he's what we could call a moral exemplar, somebody who stood up at a time when so few other people were willing to stand up, somebody who was a voice, as the film indicates, a voice among the silent in a generation when too many people were silent. And so it's an honor to salute James McDonald, to help bring his story to public light. And it is my fervent wish that this extreme politicization that we're all living through will not continue to prevent McDonald's story from being brought to public attention.
Thank you all for coming today. Thank you all. Thank you to all of the guests. I mean, I think that we're talking about one hero who did remarkable work, an unsung hero. And I feel like, I bet there are many of you in this audience who are also unsung heroes. So just keep on doing the right, standing with what's right, standing up for what's right, doing, and, being the upstander, right? As we all say, and not the bystander. So until next time, I look forward to seeing you guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a
It
good
was wonderful.